Imagine a scenario where the criminal acts as his own whistleblower. In the vast annals of true crime history, there are masterminds who evade capture for decades, and then there are those who seem determined to catch themselves. We often look at unsolved mysteries with a sense of dread and wonder regarding the capabilities of the human mind to deceive. However, tonight on Midnight Docket, we examine a case that sits on the complete opposite end of the spectrum. This is not a story of high-stakes cat and mouse games played by geniuses. It is the story of a heist so clumsily executed that it essentially solved itself in real time through the miracle of modern technology. The concept of the perfect crime has fascinated humanity for generations. We consume media about bank robbers who tunnel into vaults with precision engineering and thieves who bypass laser grids with acrobatic grace. These stories appeal to us because they showcase a level of competence that demands a grudging respect, even if the act is illegal. Yet the reality of criminal activity is often far less glamorous and far more chaotic. Most crimes are crimes of opportunity committed by desperate individuals who have not thought more than 5 minutes ahead. The case we are discussing today exemplifies this lack of foresight in the most humorous and humiliating way possible. Our story takes us to the quiet town of Danville in the state of Kentucky. It is a place known for its rich history and small-town charm, rather than high-profile criminal activity. The community is tight-knit, and the police force is accustomed to dealing with routine traffic stops and minor disturbances. However, on a fateful night in February, the local law enforcement would find themselves listening to one of the most bizarre emergency calls in the history of the department. It was a call that would not only lead to an immediate arrest, but would also turn the perpetrators into global laughingstocks. The date was February 19th in the year 2011. The winter air in Kentucky was crisp, and the streets were largely empty as the night deepened. Most residents were safely tucked in their beds, oblivious to the comedy of errors about to unfold at a local establishment. Two men named Robert Bourne and David Grigsby had formulated a plan to acquire some quick cash. Their target was not a high-security bank or a jewelry store laden with diamonds. Instead, they had set their sights on a local barbecue restaurant known as Brothers Barbecue. Robert Bourne and David Grigsby were not career criminals in the traditional sense of organized syndicates. They were opportunistic and arguably not the brightest minds in the criminal underworld. They believed that breaking into a restaurant after hours would be a low-risk endeavor. They anticipated finding a cash register full of bills or a safe that could be easily pried open. What they did not anticipate was the crucial role that their own cell phone would play in their downfall. As they prepared for the break-in, they gathered their tools and steeled their nerves for the task ahead. The restaurant sat silent and dark as the two men approached the building. Brothers Barbecue was a popular spot in Danville known for its ribs and friendly atmosphere. At this hour, however, it was merely a locked structure holding potential loot. The two men scouted the perimeter, looking for the best point of entry. They moved with a lack of professional stealth, stumbling through the shadows and whispering loudly to one another. It was clear from the outset that this operation lacked the military precision of a Hollywood heist movie. They decided to gain entry by climbing onto the roof. This required physical exertion and a fair amount of scrambling. As they hoisted themselves up the rough exterior of the building, one of the men made a fatal error that had nothing to do with noise or footprints. In the struggle to climb, the phone in his pocket was subjected to pressure. The buttons were mashed against his leg or the fabric of his pants. In a twist of fate that defies probability, the phone dialed the emergency number 911. The call connected to the local dispatch center in Danville. Inside the quiet dispatch room, a 911 operator received the incoming line. Usually a call to emergency services involves a frantic voice screaming for help or a calm report of a fire. This time, there was silence followed by the muffled sounds of physical struggle and heavy breathing. The dispatcher was trained to listen for signs of distress in silent calls. Was this a kidnapping victim trying to signal for help without speaking? Was it a medical emergency where the caller had collapsed? The dispatcher pressed the headset closer to her ear, straining to decipher the audio. The line remained open. The phone was clearly live and transmitting audio from its location. Slowly distinct voices began to emerge from the static and rustling noises. It became apparent that this was not a medical emergency. The voices were conversing. They were talking about a ladder. They were talking about a vent. The realization dawned on the dispatcher that she was listening to a crime in progress broadcast live by the criminals themselves. Back at the restaurant, Robert and David were completely unaware that they had an audience. They were focused on finding a way into the building through the ventilation system or a roof access door. Their conversation was a mix of grunting from physical effort and strategic planning that sounded more like a comedy sketch. They discussed the logistics of entering the building and speculated on how much money they might find inside. Every word they spoke was being recorded on the dispatch system at the police station. The dispatcher quickly alerted the on-duty police officers. She informed them that she had an open line with two individuals who appeared to be breaking into a business. Using the triangulation data from the cell phone tower, the police were able to pinpoint the general location of the call. The signal was coming from the vicinity of the Brothers Barbecue restaurant. Patrol cars were dispatched immediately, but with instructions to approach silently. The element of surprise was handed to them on a silver platter. As the police cars rolled silently through the streets of Danville, the two thieves managed to breach the interior of the restaurant. They dropped down into the kitchen area, surrounded by the smell of cold grease and spices. They felt a rush of adrenaline, believing they had successfully passed the hardest part of the mission. They began to rummage around looking for the office or the cash register. The phone in the pocket continued to broadcast their every move, including the clatter of pots and pans they accidentally knocked over. The audio feed provided a play-by-play commentary for the dispatcher. She could hear them debating where the safe might be located. One of them suggested looking in the freezer, while the other insisted on checking the front counter. The dialogue was filled with bickering and confusion. It was a window into the disorganized mind of an amateur criminal. The dispatcher relayed these details to the officers, who were now setting up a perimeter around the building. Chief of Police Tony Gray later remarked on the absurdity of the situation. He noted that in his many years of law enforcement, he had never encountered suspects who essentially called the police on themselves before the crime was even fully underway. It turned the usual investigation process upside down. Typically, police arrive after a crime to look for clues. In this instance, the clues were being live-streamed to them while the crime was happening. It removed all the guesswork from the equation. Inside the restaurant, Robert and David finally located the alcohol supply. They decided to help themselves to some beer while they continued their search for cash. This decision further impaired their judgment and slowed them down. They cracked open bottles and toasted to their success, oblivious to the fact that police cruisers were quietly surrounding the building. The flashing lights were kept off to avoid tipping them off. The officers took positions at the exits, ready to spring the trap. The dispatcher continued to monitor the call, ensuring the line stayed open. She heard them talking about exiting the building. They had gathered what they could find, which amounted to very little actual cash and some alcohol. They discussed their escape route planning to leave the same way they came in, or perhaps through a back door. The police officers outside tightened the net, waiting for the moment the suspects would emerge. The timing had to be perfect to ensure a safe apprehension. As the two men prepared to leave, they felt a sense of accomplishment. They believed they had pulled off a clean burglary. They had entered unseen and were about to leave unseen. Or so they thought. They opened the door to exit the restaurant and stepped out into the cool night air. The parking lot, which had been empty when they arrived, was now filled with the silent presence of law enforcement. They took a few steps before the darkness was shattered by the beams of police flashlights. Commands to freeze and show their hands echoed through the night. Robert and David were stunned. The sudden appearance of the police was incomprehensible to them. How could they have known? There were no alarms triggering loud sirens. There were no guard dogs barking. The police were just there as if by magic. The two men dropped their stolen goods and complied with the orders, raising their hands in surrender. The look of confusion on their faces was palpable even in the dim light. The officers moved in and handcuffed the suspects. As they were being searched and read their rights, one of the officers likely asked the question that was on everyone's mind. Did you know your phone is on? The realization hit them like a physical blow. The phone was retrieved from the pocket, still connected to the 911 dispatch center. The call had lasted for a significant duration, capturing the entire event from the initial climb to the final arrest. The arrest of Robert Bourne and David Grigsby was processed without incident. They were taken to the Danville police station, the very place they had unknowingly called. The evidence against them was overwhelming. Not only were they caught red-handed at the scene with stolen property, but there was also an audio recording of their conspiracy and execution of the crime. It was the prosecutorial equivalent of a slam dunk. There was no defense they could possibly mount against their own voices. News of the butt dial burglary spread quickly. The local news station picked up the story, and soon it went national. The audio recording was released to the public, and it became an instant viral sensation. People across the country listened to the bumbling thieves discussing their heist while the police closed in. It was featured on late-night talk shows and news segments devoted to the lighter side of the news. The sheer incompetence of the act struck a chord with the public. The owner of Brothers Barbecue was relieved that the suspects were caught so quickly and that damage to the property was minimal. In interviews, he expressed gratitude to the police department for their swift action. He also couldn't help but chuckle at the method of capture. It is not often that a victim of a crime gets such immediate closure, coupled with a humorous anecdote. The restaurant even saw a slight uptick in business as locals came in to talk about the incident. For Robert and David, the consequences were serious despite the humorous nature of their capture. They were charged with burglary and public intoxication, among other offenses. The legal system does not give a discount for stupidity. They faced jail time and fines. However, their legacy would not be defined by the severity of their punishment, but by the method of their capture. They had earned a permanent spot in the Hall of Fame for dumb criminals. This incident highlights a broader theme in modern criminology, which is the ubiquity of technology. In the past, criminals only had to worry about fingerprints or eyewitnesses. Today, almost everyone carries a tracking device and a microphone in their pocket. Smartphones are constantly connected to networks and can be triggered inadvertently. This digital footprint is becoming the primary way crimes are solved, often without the criminal even realizing they are creating evidence. The psychological aspect of this case is also fascinating. It demonstrates the tunnel vision that occurs during the commission of a crime. The perpetrators were so focused on the external environment and the potential rewards that they completely neglected their immediate personal space. They failed to secure their own equipment. This lack of situational awareness is a common trait among unskilled criminals who are driven by impulse rather than strategy. The recording itself serves as a unique historical document. It provides an unfiltered look into the mindset of two burglars in real time. There is no posturing for a camera or interrogation room confession. It is raw and candid. We hear their fears, their greed, and their trivial concerns. It humanizes the criminal act in a way that is both pathetic and illuminating, showing the banality of evil, or in this case, the banality of incompetence. The Danville Police Department used this case as a teaching moment. It reinforced the importance of dispatchers and their role in active investigations. The quick thinking of the operator to keep the line open and interpret the noises was crucial. It transformed a potential cold case into an immediate arrest. It showcased the teamwork required between the communication center and the patrol officers on the street. There have been other instances of accidental emergency calls during crimes, but few have been as clear or as lengthy as the Danville incident. It serves as the archetype for this specific genre of criminal failure. Whenever a similar story breaks in the news, it is inevitably compared to the two guys in Kentucky who called the cops on themselves. It has become the benchmark for accidental self-incrimination. As we reflect on this story, it serves as a reminder that crime rarely pays, and when it does, it is usually short-lived. The romanticized version of the criminal mastermind is largely a fiction created by Hollywood. The reality is often two guys fumbling around in the dark, oblivious to the fact that they are their own worst enemies. It strips away the allure of the outlaw lifestyle and reveals it for what it often is, which is desperate and foolish. In the end, the story of the thief who but dialed 911 is more than just a funny headline. It is a cautionary tale about the perils of technology and the inevitability of justice. Whether through brilliant detective work or sheer dumb luck, the truth has a way of coming out. For Robert and David, their 15 minutes of fame came at the cost of their freedom and their dignity, leaving them as the punchline to a joke told in police stations across America. So the next time you hear about a daring heist or a complex robbery, remember the boys from Danville. Remember that for every criminal genius, there are countless others who stumble into a jail cell because they forgot to lock their phone screen. It is a comforting thought that sometimes the bad guys do the hard work for the police. And that concludes this entry on the Midnight Docket, where truth is often stranger and funnier than fiction.